The Kim Campbell point about the gallery being a conservative institution is maybe a good turning point to talk about what are the issues now. I mean, what from the research you've done in the book, the work you've done in the book, and your own experiences, what are the biggest challenges that the gallery faces at the moment? Jennifer.
Well, I'd just start by saying that I don't subscribe to the view that there was some sort of golden age of the gallery where things were somehow better. I think there is actually a lot of good things going on right now in the sense that because the gallery is more diffuse, like we're spread out across Ottawa and different places, I don't sense that the same sort of pack mentality. I think there's a lot of let's do our own thing, like so-and-so's doing X, well, we're going to do Y. And that you know, people are really trying to be different from each other, even though there's fewer and fewer of us. That there is that that sense of, you know, okay, well, so and so's, you know, they've got a perspective on the story, and we've got a different one. And I also think that there's more gender diversity in the gallery, although it could be much better. It's only about 35%, and when you consider how many women there are in journalism schools, it should be well over 50%. I think that there's still like a persistent feeling around politics, that politics is done by men. And I think that you know, the more women that have senior roles in the gallery as bureau chiefs, as hosts, show hosts, like Rosemary Barton and so on, I think it'll probably telegraph to more young women that reporting on Parliament Hill is something that they should be doing. But in terms of you know, the gallery's challenges, so the number of gallery members is declining a bit, but the strange thing is it's staying somewhat consistent because we're getting new digital players into the gallery. So Rabble, Vice, Huffington Post, BuzzFeed. Vancouver Observer, BuzzFeed,
the Tyee.
The Tyee. So the thing is that we're kind of in a way returning to the way that gallery used to be a long time ago, which is that you have like one-off organizations with one reporter, and incidentally, most of those organizations seem to don't have women working for them. I don't quite know why, and that kind of concerns me.
BuzzFeed.
BuzzFeed,
50%, one of two.
Yeah, one of two. But yeah, the other ones I mentioned. So we're going back to smaller organizations with one person, and then the big organizations like Canadian Press and CBC are atrophying. Obviously, I was going to say CanWest, but Post Media. So,
but I'd argue there's a big difference in that what the galleries lost, and it began in the 1990s, was individual news organizations from individual communities.
Right.
So
the
there's
regional.
Well,
regional.
cities. I mean,
yeah, in the cities.
You know, in the 90s there was the London Free Press, the Hamilton Spectator, the Windsor Star.
Montreal Gazette.
BCTV had a reporter here.
Yeah.
We've lost all of that, and so anything that gets done now is things that's getting done written with a national frame to cover because it's you're read by a lot of people all over the place, and the gallery's lost. I mean, I remember when I was there first in the late 80s, the Gazette had a columnist and 2 reporters, and there's nobody now.
And it might not seem like a lot, but if
it's a lot.
If the London Free Press is here, it might not matter to you, but it sure as heck matters to the MPs from London.
Absolutely,
right? You know, it matters to them a lot. I think 2 things. Jen mentioned the sort of expanding organizations. It brings up the question of what is a journalist, who is a journalist.
Absolutely.
That's a big one. We saw with Ezra Levant in the Alberta Press Gallery a week or 2 ago, where Notley decided to, for reasons that have evaded me thus far, ban Ezra Levant and give him the heyday of publicity that he's had. You know, we face that. You mentioned, like, you know, Tyee, National Observer. These are organizations that have a slant they're coming from. You know, increasingly the funding models are such that you have to come from a certain, like, you have to get your money somewhere. And so I think the gallery has continued to set things pretty loosely. You could argue that from the same perspective, like, you know, my former employer, the Globe and Mail, might have been considered coming from a business slant. But, you know, as a gallery, it's increasingly upon us to decide or not to decide who is a journalist and who isn't a journalist. The bar remains, I think, appropriately very low. If you have, I think, 2 employers, like 2 regular freelance employers, you know, you got a good
But
shot.
who's an employer?
You have to, yeah.
That's exactly it. It's
I think
changing.
you have to
Luckily,
just-
I don't have to
yeah.
make that decision.
I think maybe you just have to show that you work there full-time. This
Yeah.
is what you get most of your money. I don't think you have to have even two, do you? Just one, as long as you can say, oh, if you're a freelancer, you have to have two, okay?
The other thing that jumps to mind, one of the reasons print media pushed against broadcasters or being part of the gallery is there's twofold. Number one, they were going to lose freelance revenue. They freelanced a lot of their stuff to broadcasters because they were the only ones that had it right, so it was hitting them in the pocketbook. Interesting. And the second one is they couldn't just write what happened anymore. They had to push it forward, right? This is an issue we face today suddenly again, right? We used to be able to write in the not that long ago, newspapers would write what happened the day before, and now that's the web story. Well, you know, I fought that battle daily at the Globe. If I wanted to make the print edition, that story wasn't getting it. You had to cast it forward somehow. So that's interesting. We're sort of pivoting back to this notion of the web is doing what broadcast did, is making existing gallery members with sort of a legacy workflow mentality reevaluate why they're here. What is the value add? What is my purpose? So, you know, I think that changes where we're going as well.
Mm-hmm. Janice, any
No,
thoughts?
and I just think, just to add to that, I think that the gallery does have to keep as, you say the bar is low, but they have to keep it as probably open as possible in the changing climate to what is a journalist. You don't want somebody who's directly shilling for somebody to be a member of the gallery, and I know that there have been a couple of applications like that, and it is actually the board of directors of the gallery that decides ultimately who gets a 6-month membership, a temporary one, and then who gets a permanent membership. Yeah. And the way it is now is that, or has been anyway, I was on the executive about 15 years ago, and I know it's still pretty much the same from what I understand, that if you can show, you say, two employers if you're a freelancer, but that you have to have, you don't have to be a traditional journalist, and I think that is one of the things that the gallery is going to be facing in the future, the question of what is a journalist. As the line starts to move a little bit, does the gallery move with it? And is that a good thing? And yes, it probably is a good thing because you don't want everybody who's the same, and you want as much diversity in the gallery as you can have. So I think with digital media coming on board, I mean, the numbers, like as Jennifer said, have stayed pretty stable over the years. They're down a little bit, but it brought all of these different voices. It's sad because of the nationalization of news, as you say,
Yes.
And that's actually a big problem. But I think the idea of having all of these different kinds of voices in there and having ethnic or diverse voices from, or even like Aboriginal People's Television is like a big gallery member now. That's a really good thing. And I think
it's only since 2000. That's one of the things we discuss in the book. They recall arriving and finding only 2 reporters doing Aboriginal issues whatsoever. The Minister of then Indian Affairs waited over a year to give APTN an interview, which is insane in retrospect. And APTN does some of the best stuff coming out.
They really do.
They cover stuff that no one else is covering.
And they've got a sizable bureau as well.
I interviewed the former correspondent. She was laughing. She's like, I used to come to scrums in my buckskin jacket, and we used to joke to each other like, do you think they know which one's APTN? Is it obvious? But they do some of the great stuff, and I think the gallery has moved quickly. And BuzzFeed and Vice are not organizations that I imagine the gallery and thinking 10 years ago that it would ever add. And they did add them. They added them quickly. Yeah. They added APTN very quickly. There was no problem with that. And Vice and APTN and BuzzFeed do some great work. Yeah. It's not just like, GIFs and cursing and whatever that some people might envision these organizations to be. They do great journalism. And I think it's really important that galleries in Ottawa and elsewhere, provincial galleries, keep an open mind to what is a journalist. Yeah. There's been no drawbridge syndrome of trying to keep people out at all, like pull up the bridge. I don't think that's happened at all. Long since gone. Like I think,
I think you raise a really good issue about the local reporting, because I think over time it's going to erode, or has already eroded, the public's understanding of Parliament and why it matters to them. Yes. And that's why I think that politicians have missed this as a policy issue. I don't know that the current committee is necessarily going to come up with any, well, hopefully, but...
What it also does is it eliminates the contact that used to exist where reporters. I mean, when you had a local journalist, someone from the Hamilton Spectator, they were there mostly to cover what happened in to the Hamilton MPs. And so they would be hearing every day from their desk that we don't care about these other stories. These are the stories we care about in Hamilton. Right. And that would get put into the discussion and debate every day. And that doesn't happen anymore. You don't, it very rarely happens. And similarly, I would argue at least that you don't see, that's part of the reason why individual MPs get very little publicity now. Because they don't get much back at home.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's unfortunate is the specialization, the beat reporting is basically evaporated. So Kelsey does agricultural affairs. Barry Wilson, who spent 30 years on the Hill working for the Western Producer, he told me when he started, there might have been like 6 people at the Ag Committee. And then by the time he retired 2 years ago, he was the only person, or the 2 of you. And so imagine how many people in Canada care about what the Agriculture Committee decides. And also Barry covered world food issues and so on. But now he's gone. And when you think about it, who covers fisheries?
Right.
I mean,
no one.
I don't know.
Finance Committee has 3 people at it during.
Yeah, or transport, or there are a lot of black holes now in coverage, and I think that's another thing that's happened.
Mm-hmm. One other problem, I think, when we talk about things coming full circle, before Hansard, that was your job, right? You just recorded what happened. You didn't need to cast forward. You weren't competing with broadcasters, whatever. That broadcasters came, Hansard arrived, TV arrived, the web arrived. All that has changed. Twitter arrived, and it's almost like we're back to square one, where there's a tendency now, I think, in the Hill, myself included at times, to just tweet things as they go and but what is the value add there? If you're just transmitting everything that comes by, I mean, there's a school of thought to that, but we have Hansard, we have TV, I think we are struggling to find our value add, to find our purpose, to see what we're best at in a Twitter era. Twitter can use up all your day if you let it, and at the end of your day you're going to have a lot of interactions and a lot of impressions, and that's great, but it's kind of vague what you get out of it, and particularly in a time when we're really struggling as media organizations to monetize websites and figure out how to make it. Sure, you can drive thousands of readers to your website through your Twitter page, great, but if you can't monetize it.
I want to throw the floor open for questions, but I want to try one thing on the panel before we do that. I think I could make a pretty good case that the period under the Conservative government was not exactly wonderful times with the gallery. But one of the things the gallery may have discovered during that period was how few friends they had, and how little the public really cared about the concerns that the gallery was concerned about. The gallery made noise about it. The public didn't make as much noise, perhaps. Maybe it's time for the gallery to rethink about think what it does and how it does things. And Josh and I talked about this the other day. The gallery right now collects a lot of information, records a lot of scrums, does a whole bunch of things that it puts up on the website for gallery members. Maybe it's time to open that up and let that open for the general public, and let anybody who wants to hear the scrum of a minister that morning or wants to hear something else could go and find it, and they could use it for whatever purposes they want. Maybe that's a different future for the gallery that's better attuned to the way media's going. I don't know, Josh and I talked about this at coffee the other morning.
I'm happy to talk.
As a service to people, or just for the public to do? Something that you subscribe to, or?
Well, there's different ways you can do it. You could do it as a subscription.
You're saying almost
you
as
could do
a
it for
public
free.
duty, though.
Yeah, public duty. Yeah.
Yeah,
to,
absolutely.
To then because then you build friends that you need.
Sure. I mean, it would be largely symbolic. A lot of these things are available online anyway. For instance,
all the scrums that go on generally aren't, right? Yeah, you can get them on the website now and things like that, but you can't get them. Maybe it's time to look at, as a collective organization, something that a service that's provided to the public, since the public now has access to a lot of things anyway.
And to be honest, Chris, when we spoke about that, it was the first time it ever had been suggested to me. So it gives you a sense of how slow-moving things can be. Personally, I'm sort of agnostic on the proposal, but I would bet you'd face exactly the same resistance you faced in the 1950s when the Speaker more or less forced the gallery to add Sam Ross and Tom Earl
as
as broadcasters, right? You know, this is our fiefdom. This, you know, we're putting up the walls, and we don't want that to change. I think you'd probably have some resistance on that. As I say, you know, I'm not trying to dodge. I honestly don't come down strongly. I could see both sides of the argument. I can see the side of the argument that says, you know what, that scrum was produced by our reporters going there. We pay their salaries. That scrum was, you know. And I could see the other side of the argument that says, who are we to be the barrier of information to the public? You know, there's, I think, probably legitimacy to both sides.
Well, I would just challenge you on one aspect of that, is that I think that the gallery members actually censored themselves during the 10 years of the Conservative government, in the sense that what you would often hear, even before you said anything about what was going on, was no one wants to hear about that. The readers don't care. But I think that the election actually proved that they did care. They did care about transparency and accountability. But we were had it drummed into us that you know, we were a bunch of whiners if you complained about freedom of the press and access and so on. So I come at it a bit differently. I actually you know, would routinely argue that we need to put X on the record, because 10, 15, 20 years from now, no one's going to remember that so-and-so did this to limit what your access was. And I think it's actually important. And the other thing about that is, and I think that the major news organizations are doing this now with the Journalism Is campaign, but that I felt for a long time that the major mainstream media should be making a public case to why our jobs are important, and why it's important that we're holding people to account and demanding questions from politicians. And so while I think it's great to have raw material for the public can't go and demand an answer from...
No, but the public can go and listen.
They can go.
Just as the public can go and read a report when it comes out right now, the media is not the intermediary that they used to be.
Well, so
and you have to figure out what's your new position and all in that world.
Absolutely. Well, I think we put. I mean, I'm saying we, but my previous employer, the Canadian Press, would put a lot of raw data or raw material out there. But you'd often hear from the government, we want to give you information without a filter. But of course there's a filter on government information. I mean, they've put their spin on it. And so I always thought our job was to to provide the context and the background. Well, the government's saying this, this minister is saying this, but he forgot to mention all of this stuff.
Of course.
Right.
But if the politicians knew that their scrums were all available for anyone to listen to at any point in time, would they change what they're saying?
I think they would. I mean, one clip of Bill Morneau saying the great news is we have a plan doesn't really jump off the page. If you saw a transcript of Bill Morneau saying that 9 times in one press conference and refusing to answer direct questions, it might hit home. Chrystia Freeland today gave a press conference where she dodged very specific questions, in my view, on CETA. John McCallum, you talk about being a filter, was just on CBC with us, celebrating how they've hit their target of 25,000 refugees 2 days before deadline. Well, of course, it's 60 days after their original deadline, and it's only after lumping together government refugees and private refugees, which is not the same thing.
That's what we said.
It's semantics maybe, but they clearly didn't hit their target, their initial target. I preaching to the choir clearly, but I think it matters. I think that filter does matter, but I'm not sure that would necessarily be an argument to not putting the raw information out there in the first place.
It's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
Most of that context is out there as raw information.
Microphones are available if anyone would like to ask any questions, comment. In the meantime, I'll ask one more just to get people going. One of the other things that's happened in the last 20 years has been the almost complete elimination of foreign correspondents in the gallery.
Yeah.
There were, in the 1980s, there were New York Times, LA Times, lots of people. Bloomberg Canada is still here, but Bloomberg is feeding into an international. But we don't have many of those people anymore.
Maybe a few Asian correspondents,
Chinois,
Vietnamese, Sinhua, maybe, but they've changed.
Fairchild Television was. I don't know if they still are or not.
It's a very small number.
Which is Canadian anyway.
Yeah.
But
increasingly, foreign correspondent could mean Toronto. By the standards of the gallery.
Yeah.
Is that something the gallery should be worried about, and can it do anything about it?
What are you going to do? I mean, I don't think it's at the top list of Canadian public policy priorities that the people of another country might not be getting the.
I think it was a function of tax policy at one point, but I'm not.
There are tax
Right?
restrictions now on it.
Some of the New York Times and Washington Post left because the taxes, they just didn't, their correspondents were going broke living here. They didn't like it.
They were reporting from Chicago.
Yeah,
I think the
exactly.
New
Or
York
New
Times-
York or anywhere else. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, well, Ian Austin
Well,
works for the Times here
Washington
now,
Post
but
had somebody in Toronto for 3 years.
yeah,
And
yes,
same with the Chicago Tribune, yeah.
And it even goes back,
And they're still paying their taxes, they claim.
right.
I was just going to mention that it goes back to since the beginning of the gallery, there were people from the New York Times and from the London newspapers, Chicago newspapers. As I said, there was a woman from the Swedish Expressen, Stockholm Expressen. So it's a bit of a shame actually, because it's also too bad for sort of selling Canada to
Yes.
the world, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Although our election has not produced a lack of interest internationally.
now there's a
That's true.
correspondent from Hello.
Really,
No, I was just joking.
it absolutely could happen. They had a Vogue spread lately. Like people are floating around.
That's right.